trapper in the 1830s got caught above the tree line in the Absaroka Range at 40 below zero. No trees anywhere, just wind-packed snow and a single hand axe on his belt. But by morning he was alive inside a dome of snow that was warmer than most canvas tents, built with nothing but that axe and his own body heat. That kind of knowledge has been almost completely forgotten. These are 10 survival shelters mountain men built with one axe when blizzards hit without warning. Mountain men didn't carry emergency beacons or signal flares. They carried an axe, a knife, and whatever the land around them offered. The Rockies, the Sierra Nevada, the Bitterroots. These mountains would kill a man overnight if he didn't know how to build shelter fast. And the structures these trappers came up with under that kind of pressure were some of the most clever survival engineering you've never heard of. Number 10. The Fallen Tree Lean-To. This was the fastest shelter a mountain man could throw together when a storm rolled in with almost no warning. The concept was dead simple. Find a large tree that had already fallen, or chop one down if nothing was available, and use the trunk as your main structural wall. A trapper would take his axe and hack off branches from nearby standing timber, dragging them over and leaning them at a steep angle against the windward side of the downed trunk. He would layer those branches thick, starting with the heaviest limbs at the base and working up to dense evergreen boughs on top. The boughs acted like shingles on a roof, shedding snow and blocking wind. The real trick was fire placement. A mountain man would build his fire on the opposite side of the trunk from his sleeping position. The log acted as a giant heat reflector, bouncing warmth back toward him while the lean-to wall behind him blocked the wind. Between the reflected heat and the windbreak, a man could survive a night that would have killed him in the open inside of an hour. It wasn't comfortable. Nobody was calling it cozy, but it kept men breathing when the alternative was freezing stiff in a snowdrift. Old trappers knew to stack green wood on the fire before sleeping, because green logs burn slower and last through the night. A man who let his fire die at 3 in the morning in a Rocky Mountain blizzard might not wake up at all. But the Fallen Tree Lean-To depended on one thing: trees. What happens when a trapper gets caught above the tree line with no timber at all? Number 9. The Snow Trench. When a trapper was caught on an exposed alpine ridge, sometimes there were no logs to work with. No fallen timber, no standing deadwood, just snow. Deep, wind-packed snow stretching in every direction. That's when the snow trench saved lives. A mountain man would use the flat of his axe blade like a shovel, chopping and scooping a narrow trench into the snowpack about 3 feet wide and long enough to lie down in. He would cut the walls straight and deep, at least 4 feet, creating a channel that dropped him below the worst of the wind chill. If he had any branches at all, he would lay them across the top of the trench and pile snow over them to create a roof. If not, he would cut blocks of compacted snow with his axe and bridge them across the gap. What made this work was basic physics. Snow is a surprisingly effective insulator. Once a man was below the surface with a roof overhead, the wind couldn't reach him. His own body heat, trapped in that tight space, could raise the temperature inside the trench by 20 or 30 degrees compared to the surface. On a night when the air above was 40 below, the inside of a snow trench might hover around 0. Not warm by any stretch, but survivable. The smart ones would also dig a lower shelf at their feet because cold air sinks. That little channel at the bottom of the trench would collect the coldest air and keep it away from the trapper's core. A small detail, but in survival, small details are the difference between waking up stiff and not waking up at all. The snow trench was a lifesaver on exposed ridges, but down in heavy timber, nature sometimes built the shelter for you. Number 8. The Tree Well Shelter. This is one of those shelters that didn't really require building at all, which is exactly why mountain men loved it in a pinch. In heavy snow country, large evergreen trees, especially old-growth spruce and fir, create a natural pocket of sheltered space around their trunks. The dense canopy of branches catches the falling snow before it reaches the ground, leaving a hollow well of relatively clear space right up against the base of the tree. A trapper caught in a sudden whiteout could duck into one of these tree wells and instantly drop out of the wind. With his axe, he would trim away the lower dead branches to open up more room, then pile those cut boughs on the ground as a sleeping mat to insulate himself from the frozen earth. If he had time, he would hack additional branches from nearby trees and weave them into the canopy overhead, thickening the natural roof. The limitation was fire. Building a fire inside a tree well was risky because the overhead branches were a canopy of dry needles waiting to ignite. So this was primarily a no-fire shelter, which meant the mountain man relied entirely on insulation and wind protection to get through the night. In deep timber during a heavy snowstorm, that was often enough. Experienced trappers knew which trees to look for. An old-growth Engelmann spruce with branches sweeping all the way to the ground could create a natural shelter 6 or 8 feet across at the base, with a ceiling of dense, interlocked needles overhead. It was like stepping into a room that nature had already built. All a man had to do was move in. Tree wells were fast, but they had limits. No fire meant relying entirely on whatever warmth a man could trap with his own body. When a trapper needed real wind protection and heat, he had to build something sturdier. Number 7. The bark slab windbreak. This one required a specific type of forest, but when the right trees were available, it was one of the sturdiest emergency shelters a mountain man could build. Dead standing timber, particularly species like cottonwood, birch, or certain pines, could have their bark stripped off in large flat slabs if a trapper worked his axe blade carefully along the grain. A mountain man would chop a horizontal pole and lash or wedge it between 2 trees at about chest height. Then he would lean those big bark panels against the pole, overlapping them like giant shingles. The result was a curved wall, sometimes 8 or 10 feet long, that blocked the wind completely on one side. He would seal the gaps between slabs with packed snow and moss, creating a surface almost as wind-tight as a wooden wall. The fire went in front, the bark wall went behind, and the trapper slept in between. In thick timber where the canopy overhead already blocked most of the falling snow, this setup could be remarkably effective. Some trappers used bark slab windbreaks for weeks at a time during extended winter camps. Now, every shelter so far has used materials you'd expect: wood, bark, boughs, snow. But this next one is probably the most counterintuitive shelter on the entire list, because the building material is the last thing you'd expect to keep a man warm. Number 6. The Quinzhee. A lot of people confuse the Quinzhee with an igloo, but they are completely different structures. An igloo is built from carved blocks of hard-packed snow, stacked in a spiral dome. A Quinzhee is built by piling up a massive mound of loose snow and then hollowing it out from the inside. The mountain man's axe made the Quinzhee possible because it allowed him to chop and move snow quickly in a situation where speed meant survival. A trapper would spend 30 to 40 minutes scooping and packing snow into a dome-shaped mound about 5 or 6 feet tall and 8 feet across at the base. Then he would wait. This was the crucial part. The disturbed snow crystals would bond together through a process called sintering, where the snow grains lock into each other and stiffen the pile. After an hour or two, the mound became structurally sound enough to hollow out. The trapper would then chop a small entrance tunnel on the downwind side and start excavating the interior, carving out a chamber big enough to sit in comfortably. He would leave the walls about a foot thick, which provided excellent insulation. The curved dome shape distributed the weight of any additional snowfall evenly, making the quinzhee surprisingly strong. Inside a finished quinzhee, even a single candle or a man's body heat alone could raise the temperature to just above freezing while a blizzard raged at 40 below outside. Mountain men who built quinzhees in the high Rockies during January storms lived through conditions that would have been fatal in any open-air shelter. One thing the old trappers learned quickly was ventilation. A small air hole poked through the roof with a stick prevented carbon dioxide buildup inside the chamber. Forget that hole, and you might fall asleep and never wake up. The trappers who survived long enough to pass down their knowledge always mention that detail first. If the quinzhee sounds hard to believe, this next shelter might be even more impressive. No snow required, no fire required, and a man could survive 30 below zero inside one. Number 5. The debris hut. The debris hut might be the single most efficient emergency shelter ever designed for a person working alone with limited tools. A mountain man would start by finding a sturdy ridgepole, a single long branch or small log about 9 or 10 feet in length. He would prop one end up on a stump, a rock, or a low fork in a tree and let the other end rest on the ground. This created a sloped spine. Next, he would lean shorter sticks along both sides of the ridgepole, creating a rib cage frame just wide enough to crawl inside. And then came the critical step. He would pile debris on top of that frame: leaves, pine needles, dead grass, bark shavings, anything the forest offered. The layer needed to be thick, at least 2 to 3 feet of material on all sides, packed and compressed until the whole structure looked like a long, low mound of forest floor. The debris hut works exactly like a sleeping bag. A man would crawl inside head first, and his own body heat would warm the tiny airspace. The thick walls of debris trapped that heat, and because the opening was small and faced away from the wind, almost no warmth escaped. Mountain men who built these properly reported staying warm through nights when the temperature outside dropped to 20 or 30 below zero, with no fire at all. Dry forest debris is one of the best natural insulators on the planet, and when you pile enough of it around a small enclosed space, the physics work in your favor every time. If you're finding this useful, hit subscribe. We cover wilderness survival, frontier history, and the lost skills of the old mountain men every week. Now, every shelter so far was designed to get a man through one night, maybe two. But Rocky Mountain blizzards didn't always cooperate with that timeline. Some storms lasted a week, and when that happened, a trapper needed a shelter he could actually live in. Number 4. The Wickiup. The Wickiup was borrowed directly from techniques that indigenous peoples across North America had been using for thousands of years, and mountain men were smart enough to recognize a good design when they saw one. A trapper would cut a dozen or more poles, each about 10 to 12 feet long, and arrange them in a rough circle, leaning them together at the top to form a cone shape. He would tie or wedge the tops together, then start layering material from the bottom up. First came strips of bark, then evergreen boughs, then whatever debris the forest floor offered: leaves, pine needles, dead grass. The layers went on thick, sometimes a foot deep, until the whole structure looked like a giant mound of forest litter with a dark opening on one side. The beauty of the Wickiup was that small interior fire pit with a smoke hole left open at the peak. A mountain man could actually sit inside, tend a fire, dry his clothing, and stay warm through an extended blizzard that might last for days. The conical shape shed snow naturally, and the layered walls trapped heat far better than any flat structure could. Building one took longer than a lean-to, maybe 3 to 4 hours. But if a trapper sensed a big storm coming and had time to prepare, the Wickiup was the shelter of choice. The Wickiup could handle a multi-day storm, but this next shelter took durability to a completely different level. Number 3. The A-frame Ridge Shelter. The A-frame was the mountain man's step up from a basic lean-to. It took more time, more effort, and more axe work, but what you got in return was a shelter that could handle a serious multi-day blizzard without collapsing under the snow load. A trapper would start by chopping 2 forked support posts, each about 4 feet tall, and driving them into the ground about 8 to 10 feet apart. Then he would lay a sturdy ridge beam across the forks. With the spine in place, he would cut a series of rafter poles and lean them against the ridge beam on both sides at steep angles, creating the classic triangular A-frame profile. The steep pitch was deliberate. Snow slides off a steep roof. A shallow pitch lets snow accumulate, and wet snow is heavy. A few feet of accumulation on a flat roof can collapse the whole structure. Mountain men learned that lesson the hard way and built accordingly. The final step was thatching. Starting from the bottom and working upward, a trapper would layer evergreen boughs across the rafters, each row overlapping the one below it, like the scales on a fish. Done properly, this created a roof that shed both snow and rain while trapping a pocket of still air inside. The A-frame was large enough for a man to sit up inside, store his gear, and even build a small fire near the entrance if he dug a shallow pit to contain it. What set the A-frame apart from everything before it on this list was durability. A lean-to might get you through one night. A Wickiup could handle a few days. But an A-frame, if the posts were sunk deep enough and the ridge beam was solid, could stand for weeks through repeated storms. Trappers running long winter trap lines would sometimes build a series of A-frames spaced a day's travel apart, creating a chain of shelters they could rely on all season long. A-frames were tough and reliable, but when a mountain man found the right terrain, he could build something much closer to a permanent home than a trail shelter. Number 2. The semi-subterranean dugout. When a mountain man found himself near a hillside or a steep riverbank, the dugout became the ultimate cold-weather shelter. This was the closest thing to a permanent structure that a trapper could build in a single day with nothing but an axe and raw determination. The process started by chopping into the face of a slope, carving out a rectangular chamber that extended back into the hill about 6 to 8 feet. The surrounding earth acted as a natural insulator, maintaining a temperature well above freezing even when the air outside was brutally cold. The floor was already ground level, solid and dry if the trapper chose his location wisely, picking a spot with good drainage above the water table. For the roof, he would fell small trees and lay them across the top of the excavation as beams, then pile on a layer of branches, bark, and several inches of packed earth. The result was a shelter that was nearly invisible from the outside and almost completely impervious to wind. Some mountain men added a short entryway tunnel that dropped slightly below the floor level of the main chamber. This cold trap prevented warm air from escaping because cold air sinks and stays in the lower tunnel while the warmer air rises and stays in the living space. It was the same engineering principle used in traditional Inuit snow houses, and it worked just as well dug into a hillside. Trappers who found good locations for dugouts would sometimes return to the same spot year after year. A well-built dugout with solid roof timbers and good drainage could last for decades. The dugout was about as close to a real home as emergency shelters got, but the number 1 shelter on this list went even further. Number 1. The Ridgepole Log Shelter. This was the king of one-axe emergency shelters, and building one was the mark of a truly skilled mountain man. While every shelter on this list could be thrown together in a matter of hours, the Ridgepole Log Shelter pushed toward a full day's work. But what a trapper got in return was a structure that could keep him alive and functional for an entire winter if necessary. The mountain man would select small-diameter trees, typically 6 to 8 inches across, and fell them with his axe. He would buck them into uniform lengths, usually about 8 feet, and then notch each log near the ends using a saddle notch, a shallow curved cut that allowed each round to sit snugly on top of the one below it. He would stack these notched logs to build walls about 3 to 4 feet high, then lay a heavy ridgepole across the top and lean rafter poles against it to form a peaked roof. The roof got thatched with bark slabs and evergreen boughs, and any remaining gaps in the walls were chinked with moss, mud, and packed snow. The finished structure looked like a miniature version of the log cabins that would later dot the American frontier. It had 4 walls, a real roof, and enough interior space for a man to build a fire, store meat, dry hides, and sleep off the ground on a raised platform of poles and boughs. In a region where winter storms could strand a trapper for weeks at a time, the Ridgepole Log Shelter wasn't just a survival tool, it was a home. Mountain men like Jim Bridger, Kit Carson, and Jedediah Smith built shelters across